flying out the
And
next.
I don't know if anybody will want to.
And then when we were flying back out of Naples,
Is she reading it?
it was the same. They had things screwed
My
up.
buddy who's the international traveler.
My son, but my son lets you.
You can.
He'll let you read like one page of a book.
There's dialogue boxes you can bring in.
Yeah, then he's done. He moved on. I'm going to something else. He has the attention span.
Just bring it that way.
Like, he's here one time and I'm gone.
It's like, I'm driving.
He'll bring me a book. Like, I want you to read me this book, right? He'll get the book. And it's
Yeah, right, yeah.
lap. He'll sit there on my lap, all comfortable. I'll read one page, and he's like, "I'm done." I'm like,
And there's the
water tanks. And that's to the
You flew out of Venice?
Yeah. Venice, JFK,
So was this a tour or you just going your own?
My wife has a violin.
That's it. All done. I'm doing more. I'm like, you went through this whole ordeal to get me to read this book, and you listen to one page.
I think I saw you exercising. I didn't even notice until we passed each other.
So,
Yeah.
our son.
Well, I had my headphones in. We just kind of passed. Yeah, you were. I was coming back from Harlem on my walk, and you were going that direction. So, yeah, right?
Yep.
Were you out today?
You leave him standing.
Exactly. I was like, yeah, go do a little walk and to get a fresh salad. It's always good.
Okay.
That's pretty much how I just take care of my work.
I'm not carrying on.
Good salad.
I'm just become
Days.
kind of unavailable.
The next walk I take, I kind of do the same thing.
So you stock up on it.
Yeah,
Bro,
I'm not with no one. You're right.
his I'm done is I'm gonna take it.
Okay,
And that's it. I'm done.
That's why I was like, when I goes, that's my goal.
This is not okay.
My guess is you're going to want to talk to both Gary and
be proactive, but a lot of times I'm going
And if I were available, I'd come too. But it's,
Gary?
But see, we have Mason.
I mean, it's
Anything
mostly
Mason.
not just information.
Yeah, it's moving up there.
So, and he's crazy. So no one's trying.
Today, I usually have like one of those.
He can do that. He should, but he can't.
I forgot it. So today I was just out with this, and I was like, just go nice pace. You don't want to get overexerted on it. Second meeting.
Yeah, a lot of times by doesn't have very possible.
That's pretty much what today was, yeah.
I was wondering if you have a direct line that we can shut off getting in the silence and try to work so.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
so. The other one is this guy, and I can talk to him because he wants to know. He doesn't.
Last week, I was the first guy.
He's laid up for a month.
Just dial them directly.
This is sure is, you know,
True.
Yeah.
Gordon, how are you?
They're all at different numbers.
Are you?
They're all at
You want to present for mine?
I have a private call-in number I should.
Yours too?
Setting up.
We'll be over at
You
10.
know how to do the phone there?
I'm not sure how many there are, so I don't
I have
know.
other callers in, but
I can always just get the email.
If we hang up on that later on, can we use that phone for a call-in number that she would have?
If I give you a private call-in number.
we can do that over there.
No.
But I have time now. I have to call Brett for that.
Okay. A little less pressure. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, just, yeah.
I just always wear them.
I know.
Then I realized no one's really listening.
but it's recorded. So if they want, they can put it on my Dropbox.
Yeah, because this is so exciting that people listen to them play.
I'll let her know.
That's my decision. Idea.
Yeah.
You break it, figure it out. Okay.
I mean.
We're just gonna wait a couple more minutes. We're trying to figure out how to use the phones to the confidential.
Good, Dad, how are you?
Does anybody need a copy of the slides? Want a copy of the slides? We got 10. So.
Hey, Eric, can you throw me a copy of the slides?
No, I'm good.
No, I wouldn't have done it.
They would give me a card.
Yeah, that'll work.
We're saving.
I know.
Sustainability.
Well, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. This is the time and place for technical conference in docket 19-05713. Requested Dominion Energy Utah for approval of a voluntary resource decision to construct a liquefied natural gas facility. I am Joseph Holland with the Commission. I have a roll to pass around if everybody would sign that. Do you have any preliminary matters? We have the last 4 slides of the slide deck are confidential, and so we're going to go turn the streaming off for that, and then we're going to also turn off the phones.
So, and I also want to be sure that the UAE does not have copies of the unredacted confidential slides. I don't know what we're handing out. Great, okay.
So I'm just looking for pink or yellow.
The last
papers
four
back.
should have.
The last 4 should be redacted for you. Perfect. Thank you, sorry for interrupting.
And if we could see who's on the phone.
We know you're there.
Everybody on the phone?
We can hear you breathing.
Hi, this is Melissa Witten with Daymark Energy Advisors.
Okay.
This is Alan
Yes,
Neal, also with Denmark.
And I believe my colleague Aaliyah Afnan is also on the call, and we're attending because we are working for staff on this docket.
Yeah, this presents a problem because our consultants have signed the
We're gonna.
disclosures, and so I don't know how we're anticipating them participating if we turn off the phone.
We're gonna have them call a
Special number?
Dominion number.
We'll use one of the
Okay,
Dominion
okay.
dial-ins for them. We'll just take a break and put them on the phone privately.
We just have no way to know who's.
Who's on the phone otherwise? Okay.
Sit close to the phone. Was that everyone on the phone?
Good afternoon. This is Bruce Paskett with Structural Integrity Associates on the phone also.
Hi, Bruce.
Good afternoon.
Who wants to start?
I'll start. Do you want to do introductions here, or do we all want to do it?
We might as well.
Carol Revelle, Commission staff.
Doug Wheelwright with the division.
Philip Russell with UAE.
Gary Dodge, I'm here today on behalf of Magnum Energy.
Kelly Mendenhall with Dominion Energy.
Patricia Schmidt with the Utah Attorney General's Office on behalf of the division.
Mike Platt with Dominion Energy.
William Schwarzenbach with Dominion Energy.
Eric Orton with the division.
Mike Gill with Dominion Energy.
Colleen Larkin Bell with Dominion Energy.
Jennifer Clark with Dominion Energy.
Austin Summers with Dominion Energy.
Bakizar Public Service Commission.
Artie Powell with the division.
Brenda Salter with the division.
Tina Faust, Dominion Energy.
Alex Ware with the Office of Consumer Services.
Bela Bostock also with the office.
Jeff Einfeld with the division.
All right, so thank you all for coming. Just want to give you a little explanation of how the format's going to go today. So we received 2 sets of data requests, one confidential from the division on June 7th and one non-confidential on June 10th. So the confidential version we're going to be referring to as set 1, and the non-confidential will be referring to as set 2. We think we've answered all the questions in our presentation, and for ease of presentation, what we've decided to do is take all of the questions and group them by witness. So you'll see each witness get up and discuss the questions that pertain to them. At the bottom of each slide, we've noted which question we think we're answering. So I will kick it off to Will, and he'll start us off. And then, as we mentioned earlier, there are 4 confidential slides at the end. So we'll take a little break at that point to kind of reset for that part of the presentation.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about just our
general RFP overview. So this doesn't really pertain to any particular question that was asked, just kind of giving you an overview of our RFP that we did. So prior to filing docket 1805703, DEU explored and evaluated numerous alternatives to meeting our supply reliability needs. In 2018, DEU issued an RFP to identify any additional alternatives. So we actually sent that out in January, so it should probably be 2019. We sent that out. The RFP sent out to all known regional suppliers, interstate pipelines, and storage facility operators. We'll go into some more detail on who exactly got that later. The RFP was advertised in Platts Gas Daily Newsletter. It was proposed on the Dominion Energy website along with frequently asked questions and other relevant information. It's important to note that we did run that the details of that RFP by the Office of Consumer Services and the Division of Public Utilities. We really appreciate the input that they provided back, and it helped develop the RFP. We think it helped develop it and make it a little bit better. So we appreciate that input that we got from them, or y'all. Some of the requirements that we put in the RFP, the responses were due by March 1st, 2019. We've got our years wrong here a little bit. DEU required specific delivery locations, deliveries not subject to the NASB cycles, and 30-minute delivery in order to meet the defined supply reliability needs. So that was really to address our particular needs that we identified in that RFP. Without those requirements, the responses may have been submitted would not meet those identified needs. Therefore, we really wanted to narrow it down so that A, we could get only submissions that would meet our needs, and B, that we wanted to make sure that we could compare the alternatives evenly. We wanted to be comparing apples to apples, submissions. We didn't want one that met it, one that met kind of this part of it or that part of it. We wanted to be able to compare apples to apples, all submissions that met the requirements. We're going to talk a little bit more about those requirements in a little bit. We received responses from 3 different respondents. 2 of them were new, meaning we had not worked with them in the past on any type of proposal. One of those was Prometheus Energy. They submitted 2 different proposals. A group called United Energy Partners also submitted 1 proposal. And then we got a response from Magnum Energy, who we had worked with in the past on similar proposals, and they submitted 3 proposals this time. The respondents did not indicate how they became aware of the RFP. One of the questions we got, it was either question 1 or 2 of set 1, was asking particularly who responded in response to the posted advertisement in Platts Gas Daily. And we didn't really have any way to know how exactly they got, they found out about it. Because we did try and cast a broad net, as we said, to try and reach as many people. So they didn't tell us exactly how they found out about it. The interest that we did get, we tried to manage it all through a formal RFP process, meaning we had someone in our supply chain group manage all the information that came in. So if somebody were to call me and ask me a question, I'd actually send that person over to, her name was Misty, and have Misty manage all those questions so that everybody got the information dispersed evenly, meaning they all got the answers to the questions, they all got the information together, that information was posted on our website, and we really tried to manage everything through that process to make it a very formal, very fair process to everybody that was participating. 4 of those potential respondents did fill out a response letter attached to the RFP to indicate that they would be responding to the RFP. That was part of we wanted to know in advance of receiving if there was enough interest getting out there. And we did have 4 people respond and say they were going to submit. One of those responses that said they were going to submit did not. They never wound up actually putting in a proposal. Then we held a bidders conference on January 14th. We had 18 individuals representing various entities attend that. The list is on here. I think a number of people in this room were on there. But we also had people from North Star, Prometheus, and some of these may have worked together as a group. Some of them may have grouped with like Prometheus. We think that they've been combined with some of them. We had people on the phone, but in total there were 18 participants that took place in that, not including our team from Dominion Energy. We did have 2 others from Dominion Energy. They were more from a business development group of our company that came and participated as well, considering entering a proposal. The notice that was sent out, we had a question on how we sent that out and how we attempted to cast that broad net. We have in gas supply a list that we kind of maintain of who all of our counterparties are that we deal with on a regular basis. So who we send our supply RFP out to on an annual basis, who we talk to buy gas on a daily basis, just all of our industry contacts. We keep a running list, and that's been developed over the years. So we sent it out to everyone on that list. So that included 81 what we consider regional natural gas supplier contacts. So some of them may be 2 people from the same company, but people switch companies around a lot and stuff, so we try and keep track of all of them. And so 81 of those contacts were sent it. 7 storage provider contacts, 6 interstate pipeline contacts, and 3 industry business development contacts, just people who develop different types of projects in the industry. We try and keep everybody's contacts, and we sent it to our entire list of everyone. And as I said, that list was developed over a history of interactions from industry meetings, pipeline customer meetings, just general networking, general gas supply dealings. That's how we came up with that list. We did not specifically follow up with any parties who did not express interest. So we didn't go to each one of those and start saying, hey, where's your proposal, or anything like that. It was a very open, very I guess, fair process that we managed like a very formal RFP, and we didn't want to give anybody any preferential treatment or anything like that. So we tried to kind of filter everything through that RFP process. Some of the criteria and how we evaluated those responses, both price and non-price factors were weighted equally in the evaluation process. That is explained, I think what all those criteria that we used were explained in Exhibit 1.06. It's a summary of how each one met and where the other identified risks were. If you look at that, I think one of these questions that we note down here was whether or not anyone could meet those operational needs. And if you look at 1.06, you'll see that all of them met in some way those operational needs. Some of them needed some additional system improvements or something, but in order to meet the pressures and volumes, they all met the operational needs. It was just a matter of what risks and what costs were also evaluated in there. So with the reinforcement specified, all the options can fulfill the operational requirements of the RFP. Okay, now we mentioned this before, and one of the questions was asking, why do we have to have it outside of the NASB cycles? I really thought about putting my slide back in here that I went through for about 45 minutes a few years ago, walking you through all the cycles and the problems that we had each cycle. I figured I'd spare everybody that and just kind of summarize it really quickly. But the idea is that if you're restricted by those cycles, we really do have a gap in the day, because the first intraday cycle, if we find out something happens overnight and we lose some supply, we don't find out about that until the morning. And even if we find out about it early enough to get a nomination in, a change in for this cycle at 9 o'clock in the morning, that new supply, if it can come, isn't going to show up till 1 o'clock in that afternoon. That's the best case scenario, is it's not showing up till 1 o'clock that afternoon, which leaves us a real gap. If something happened overnight, our supply is not showing up at 8 o'clock, now we're going from 8 o'clock at our peak time till 1 o'clock with nothing new taking its place. So that's why being outside of that NASB cycle is really important to us. Also, renominating a higher amount, the gas may not be available. We may try and nominate something again at 9 o'clock in the morning, and it could get cut also. And then we're really behind the 8 ball, because it's not. Then we're out of luck for even more hours. Transportation may be constrained. That just means if we do try and renominate something, now we have to, say we go out and buy more gas that's coming out of Clay Basin, we then have to transport that. Well, if everybody took up the space on that pipeline in cycle 1 and cycle 2, so basically the beginning of the day, there's not going to be space left on that pipe on an intraday cycle for us to renominate gas. It could be constrained, and therefore, even if the supply is there, we may not have our transportation, because if it was cut and somebody else got in ahead of us, then they would have taken up that transportation, and we wouldn't be able to use it. So that's why it's really important to have your nominations in cycle 1. We'll talk a little bit about that in a slide or two. Delay from nomination, confirmation, deadline, and gas flow. I think we've kind of talked about that. Analysis showed that deliveries must happen within 30 minutes to prevent loss of service to customers. So this goes to Mr. Platt over here, did a bunch of analysis, ran a lot of models to say, okay, if we lose our supply and that supply stops showing up at the city gate, we've got less than 30 minutes to prevent loss of customers. So we really had to put that restriction on there that it's got to be available and available quickly, either with a no notice, which is what some of the requirements were, some of the people met the requirements with, or an on-system type facility where it's available really quickly. There was a question asked about gate station shortfalls and which gate stations we've had particular shortfalls at. And I think it's important to note that supply shortfalls, unless it has something to do specifically on a pipeline, if it's a pipeline break or an equipment failure, in general, most supply shortfalls and our historical shortfalls have all happened upstream. So then it depends on where you're which gate stations you're transporting that gas to. So it really could go to any gate station. So we could have gas that is curtailed due to a supply shortfall at a Black's Fork plant, which could impact, say, Hiram, because that's where we had that gas transporting to, which is our Hiram gate station. Now we lose that supply at that gate. We need to be able to make up gas that based on a shortfall at that particular. So it really could affect the volumes and pressures at any gate station. And whatever resource we have has to be able to make up those volumes and pressures at any gate station, because we don't necessarily know exactly where it's going to happen. Another part of the question asked if we have historically purchased gas at all of our gate stations. So the gate stations that we do buy gas delivered to that station are Hunter Park, Riverton. We have bought some at Payson Gate Station down south, and then Wecco Central Gate Stations. I combine those because those are near Cedar City and St. George. I combine them because when we buy gas at those stations, it's a combined point. They're on the same balancing agreement, so it's really the same point. And then we bought some gas at Foothill Station, which is in Wyoming. They asked for the question was, what volumes did we buy there? The reality is we've done it quite often, so those volumes have varied. And it depends on why. We've bought gas recently down at Wecco and Central because our Indianola line is out of service and we need to make up some gas down there, so we've bought some volumes there. So it's kind of an everyday thing that this happens. So providing, it would have been a whole lot of slides telling you exactly which days and what volumes, because it's a regular occurrence at those particular gate stations. But there's not a lot of, I guess it's not very liquid trading point to say we want to buy gas at Little Mountain Gate Station. There's really nobody who's going to be selling us gas at Little Mountain Gate Station because there's not a lot of other counterparties that have the transportation capacity at those gate stations. So these are primarily where we can and where we do buy gas. Let's see, gas supply is often available at these locations. However, availability becomes limited as demand increase in Utah and locations south, like Nevada and California. So that's specifically getting to the fact that we buy gas off of Kern River's pipeline at a lot of these stations. And on high demand days, especially if there's also high demand in California or Nevada, everybody's fighting for that gas that's coming off Kern River's pipeline. So we're in a market trying to buy the gas versus Southwest Gas down in Las Vegas, who's trying to buy the same gas. You've got Southern California, who's now without one of their, with a lot of supply from one of their storage facilities, who are also trying to buy that gas. So it's really a highly competitive market when you get into that situation, that high demand type situation. So availability on a peak day is unknown. You know, we've had high, we know that when it gets really cold here and when it's cold in California, that the demand is high. If we were to hit a peak day or our design day of a -5 degrees and it's also cold in California, we really have no idea what the availability is going to be like of gas to buy it at those stations. That's why historically we've really tried to hold the transportation capacity ourselves and buy it at points where we're more confident that the gas will be there.
Well, before you go on, go back to the gate station.
Yep.
You're kind of addressing the freeze-off situation, or the gas is not coming to the system. What about a mechanical problem at the gate station itself? How does the LNG facility then fill that need? If Hunter Park goes down or something like that?
That's exactly what Mike's analysis did. So whether it's due to a supply shortfall upstream that impacts that particular gate, or whether it's just mechanical, Mike actually looked at it from our system modeling, and Mike, you can talk about it if you want.
Well, I mean, you're exactly right. To me, it doesn't matter. It's the volume missing, right? So, whatever the reason, the impact is that the volume doesn't make it to our system, and that's where my analysis starts.
Okay.
And he's done it for each of the gate stations, saying, okay, we're going to take that model and say Hiram is out of service, and we don't have any gas coming in at Hiram, and then looked at the alternatives to see how they met that. And then, you know, Payson is out of service, so okay, let's take that one out in the model and see how each of the alternatives respond to that. So he looked at each and every gate station to see which ones responded. Did a lot of modeling.
I'm sorry, to see if they were totally out or to see if they were short by 150.
Short by 150.
What if they're out, though?
We've done the out scenario at non-peak day, and many of the gate stations, 150 is out. So I mean, it depends on the volume, but like Little Mountain, it's got a capacity of about 500 million. That going out on a peak day cannot be replaced by 150 at the LNG
Right.
station. But at warmer temperatures, the LNG station could help. So
How is the changing demand for gas in California are taken into account in your modeling?
I think the only way it's really taken into account is just our concerns about availability and whether it's going to be there or not. We have concerns that the purchased gas, like for example at Hunter Park, that we're not going to be able to buy gas delivered at Hunter Park because we're going to be fighting against people in California who either have contracts for the
Over
capacity.
time, though, California is moving away from carbon resources, and so that's what I'm getting at, is how is that future projection of California moving away from carbon accounted for in your analysis?
I wouldn't say it is specifically, but I think that's why we will reevaluate our transportation contracts and stuff on Kern River if we see that demand has really dropped off on those high days or starts to drop off, because we haven't really seen that yet. They've had trouble contracting on a long-term basis, but on a short-term outlook, when you look at it, right now Kern River's pipeline is fully contracted on a short-term basis. The demand is still there right now. The question is, will it be there in 10 years, which is what you're getting at, is they're declining. And I don't really know the answer to that. It may mean we have more availability to buy gas at those stations 10 years from now, but what I see right now is that it's not there, because they're still contracting, even although it on a short-term basis as opposed to a long-term, people signing 10, 15-year contracts, they're signing shorter-term contracts, but they are fully contracted. So we see that it hasn't happened yet. So,
Can I add something to what Mike said about Little Mountain and 500 a day? I think sometimes what gets lost is supply shortfalls don't happen on a 24-hour basis a lot of times, and so it would help for part of a day, quarter of a day, or things like that, or for a peak time period in a day. And that's kind of why I think when we're talking about all these short notice, and they aren't necessarily needed for a whole gas day.
That's a good point. All right, there's another question about Clay Basin and no notice transportation. So we evaluated a bunch of potential alternatives involving Clay Basin and different storage facilities using no notice. Even one of the proposals from the RFP included no notice service on transportation. So we really had looked at some of those. We didn't relook at any of them because nobody submitted a specific proposal, like for clay basin storage. We did not get anything specific to evaluate again, so we fell on our old evaluation, and it was not the lowest cost or most reliable option to meet our supply reliability needs. Is anything involving that? And to be honest, there's not, the capacity isn't available right now. You know, it may become available, but right now it's not there, and nobody proposed it as an option. And this was sent out to other shippers who have clay basin capacity, who, if they were looking to release it, could have put some type of proposal together to say, hey, we'll release you this capacity. But we didn't get anything there, so we really didn't have anything concrete to evaluate.
So either in this one or the last one, was part of that analysis talking with pipeline, or was that internal analysis?
It was mainly internal analysis, but we also talked to them about what they could do. And I mean, they were obviously a part of our evaluation process. So we did talk to them, and it wasn't like we hid this RFP from them in any way. They were one of the ones who received it. They had a chance to
I was thinking more of for the analysis than last time.
No, I mean, we work with them and talk to them about what would be available, but there really isn't any concrete proposal that's available for us out there to say, okay, we can go and do that. As for the no-notice transportation on Kern, they actually don't have a no-notice transportation on in their tariff right now. It doesn't exist. So really anything that we would have come up with would have been just an estimate based on either a DEQP no-notice or, Eric?
As I recall, in the power issue, you went to Kern and asked them to set up, and they did. Not in this RFP, but prior, did you do that?
So they were, if I go back to the slide, they were there, so we knew they were a part of it. They were at the. We didn't talk to them specifically.
This
No.
RFP went out or anything.
Nope. I know that the one response that did include no notice on Kern River, they did talk to them, and we called them in response to that to kind of ask, hey, have you done any type of pricing? Do you have an estimate on pricing? I talked to Kern River, and they said no. They the only conversation was, would we be willing to talk about doing it? And they said, yeah, we'd be willing to do it, but we have no specifics on how it would work. We have no specifics on pricing, and that was right from Kern River. So it was very hypothetical at that point. It would all just be an estimate.
Going back, nobody could have bid on this additional clay basin because it would have been, you would have had to follow the NASB cycles. Is that correct?
Unless it had a no notice component to it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they could have used a no notice. They could have subscribed for no notice on Dominion Energy Questar pipeline and partnered that with clay basin storage and made it be outside of the cycles. So
The clay basin doesn't have a no notice.
No, the no notice is on the transportation in between. So that's
Supply.
right. But they can make the supply available to meet with a no notice. That's what they do for our contract. So it's specified in the no notice
That need to
contract.
be coupled then. The clay basin would need to be coupled with the transportation contract and no notice?
Yes. So it would have to be kind of all three together.
All three.
Okay, there was a lot of questions on an update to this slide from that we presented as part of docket 1805703. And I think in the technical conference for that, this same graph was presented. I have updated this graph. Again, I have so we didn't have the asterisk on the one last year, but you'll see it's there. But I looked back, and for that graph, just to clean up some of the noise, all of the smaller cuts that really just create a lot of noise down the bottom here, we limited it to just cuts that were over 20,000 decatherms, just to eliminate a lot of noise, because every day there's small cuts that happen, 3,000-4,000 decatherms, just mismatches, stuff like that. That's an everyday occurrence. We've eliminated those. Some key points here is the first one, to address specifically the question, is this is DEU supply only. It's actually DEU supply. It's only our cuts coming from Questar Pipeline. We didn't have the data when we presented this for Kern River, going back historically. So it was supposed to just be kind of an illustrative chart showing where some of our cuts were. So it is Questar Pipeline. It is only our supply. So third-party transportation customers are not represented by any of these cuts. We're only talking about our supply here. Just a note, and I think it wasn't on the last graph, but I figured I'd include everything here. This particular one is an outlier. I think this one is too. You'll notice, and this is a point I think that's key. You'll notice this is only a cycle 1 cut. That means, and the reason that's a 400,000 decatherm cut was, I know exactly what happened that day, is we had all of our nominations in on the pipeline side. Something happened with our software. We did not get the nominations in on time on the gas side, and they have to match. If they do not match, they get cut. And they didn't match. So all of our nominations got cut in cycle 1. They were fixed for cycle 2, but they all got cut in cycle 1. So that's a key point here, is all these just the little blue, I guess, diamonds are cycle 1 cuts. Those are usually something that just happened in cycle 1. You have your second chance before the gas flows of cycle 2. So I would put more weight, if you're looking at this, on some of these 3 down here, especially this, whatever you want to call that, a little star. You can see, like right here, this is a key one I would look at, because that had cuts throughout the day. It means they were not cleaned up, or they were not fixed throughout the day. Sometimes you'll get cuts. There's a lot of data in this, and you'll see it because I think it was part of a data request to see the source data behind this, and you'll have all that source data. But those cut reasons, they could happen for lots of reasons. They could happen because there's an actual physical issue upstream, but they could also happen just because there's, again, nomination mismatches. There's lots of things that could happen, capacity constraints. But what we found from this graph was really that the real ones that we worried about were the ones right in here, right about around 100,000 decatherms. This one was a little more than 100,000 decatherms. So when we look at that, where we came up with the sizing of 150,000 decatherms a day that we want to be able to replace, we looked that really that 150 would be a good upper bounds of any of the actual physical cuts that we saw. So this is just kind of showing that via some data. So you'll get that data. Eric?
So did anything happen on your system on that 400,000 day?
No. Because again, it happened in cycle 1.
Right. Which is
We had all the supply lined up, everything was lined up. We just had an issue, and we just had to call our suppliers and say, hey, you're gonna see this cut come through, ignore it, it'll be fixed in cycle 2 before anything flows.
Right, so that was 8 o'clock in the morning, right? Isn't that cycle 1?
So cycle 1 is evening cycle. So that's due at noon today for gas that's going to flow at 8 o'clock tomorrow. Cycle 2 is cycle 1 is timely, sorry. Cycle 2 is evening. So evening cycle means we have tonight it's kind of our second chance at nominations to get them in right, and that will flow at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. So that was fixed. Because it's only, you can see it's only the cycle 1 cut. That was fixed
before anything.
Before anything flew. Anything flowed.
So it was your second chance. You took your second chance and
Yep.
worked out.
So we had it fixed. Actually, we had it fixed minutes after we found out that it was cut. So we actually fixed it before we found out it was cut. It's just a matter of we missed the deadline. So because you missed the deadline, you have to wait until the next deadline to do anything. So we had to wait until the next deadline to get all those nominations matched up.
Can I ask a clarifying question as well?
Sure.
One of the things I think from the testimony as well, you guys mentioned that the 150,000 is also kind of the maximum amount that you could take onto your system. Does that also go into the decision for the 150,000?
So I will defer that one to Mr. Platt.
I could have sworn I read it in somebody's testimony.
I think that the 150,000 maximum amount into our system is without modification, without looking at how things are going to change over the years. Like any point with gate stations flowing, like taking more than 150 in all scenarios is really difficult to do. So, I mean, it's all about maintaining the balance, and 150 at our preliminary looks was a lot, so.
But we did model every location that we were contemplating, and Mike did models and said, okay, really, what's the range that we could comfortably take away from this site and have it be effective with our system needs and that sort of thing. So, yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay. So in response specifically to question 19, here's some things to consider. One is the volume is really shown over here. You just have to read it off the graph what the volume of each one of those cuts is, and it'll be in the source data. The key is to look at which cycle they happened in. Any cuts that last for multiple cycles, show a data point for each. Cuts remaining in cycle 6, those are the ones that really means it never got cleaned up for any reason during the day. So that's those stars that I pointed out. And the amount of cut, like I said, is shown in that graph.
Would you jump back to that for a second? How many sixes were there and how big were they? One more.
So those are anywhere you see the stars. Those were ones that left in cycle 6. So there you've got 50,000. This one's a little over 100,000.
When was the 100,000?
If I were guessing, I would say it was probably January 6th.
Oh, the supply problem.
2017.
Colville.
No, that Colville did happen on that day, but not for the same reason. They were very separate issues going on.
Wasn't a nomination.
It's memorable.
Colville was more of the example of even though it's a small gate station, of a mechanical failure at a gate station.
You had the supply. You just
We had
didn't
the
have
supply,
the
but it was
ability to
mechanical.
float on your system because
Right.
your station was broken.
But don't get us wrong, we were scrambling with our supply issues at that time when people started calling saying Colville had no gas. And I know Tina and I were rather concerned at that point. Like, oh no, did the pipeline run out of gas kind of thing. Luckily it did not, but there was a couple minutes where there was a lot of concern.
Question?
Bailey?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on Alex's question. So if this analysis had shown that maybe 200,000 was the better number to target, would that mean you'd have to have something in addition to this LNG plant? Because the location could only take 150 where it is right, where you're planning right now?
More reinforcements.
More
It
reinforcements?
would be more capital cost up front, right, to get that to flow.
So you would have to
You'd have to
increase
change
the
pipes out.
Pipes
You'd have-
out
yeah,
in
you'd have
the
to-
magnet.
You'd have to modify your system in some way to be able to take away more gas from that location.
So like you'd loop a line or something.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, there was a question about peak hour services and what the LNG facility could provide there. Basically, the way it would work is if the LNG facility would be reserved for just when standard pipeline capacity wasn't available. Right now, we're kind of, if during those peak hours on a peak day, we're above our RDC, if you remember this, that additional volume over our contract amount is flowing on an interruptible basis. So if we had this LNG facility there, we would be okay with some of that on an interruptible basis, knowing that if the pipeline did restrict us at that point to just our contract amount, we could, for a few hours, then flow out of this LNG facility to offset what they were restricting us down to. So it would just use some of the facility for a few hours on the day. If that same day we needed to use that liquefaction or withdrawal from the facility to offset supply shortfalls, we would use the facility all day long rather than just those few hours where our volume was exceeding it. So we'd wind up, being able to take a full 150 over the day instead of just taking for those few hours, if that makes any sense. Eric?
I want to ask about the few hours.
Okay.
So you're saying that pipeline will say your contract limit is 1,000, you can only take 1,000.
Yes.
But you could take 5% above that throughout the month, right, and balance by the end of the month.
Right.
Okay.
So you're getting into monthly imbalances versus exceeding the contract volume.
Right.
Yeah, so we could have imbalances with them where we flow more gas than we deliver to them, and that's an imbalance. But on that day, there's only so much space available in the pipe for them to flow to us. And what they've said is if you try and flow more than our pipe can flow you at that time, we may have to restrict you to just what your contract is, because that's all we can fit through the pipe. So if we can't fit any more through the pipe on those hours, we would get it from this facility as opposed to getting it from the pipe.
So one of the, I think it's in testimony somewhere, one of the witnesses said that this facility would help offset the need for peak hour services.
Yes.
How much?
15,000 decatherms.
15,000 decatherms.
I think I covered everything without reading it to you. So the usage would be limited to minimal days, because we'd only have a few days over the year that we would need to use it for those services, small volume, and the available LNG. And I think Mike's going to talk more about our LNG availability. We designed it. Nope, so I think we've covered that. There was a question about the supply reliability risk report, when it was prepared. So it was initially prepared in February of 2018, and then again updated in April of 2019. The whole purpose of that was to summarize really all of the risks that we consider when we're making decisions, whether they're transportation contract decisions, facility decisions. These were all the risks that we really consider in all of our decision-making process. We just kind of took those considerations and put them onto paper and updated them again in April. So that's really what that report did. It was information put together from Mike Platt, myself, Mr. Gill, and Tina over there. And it was the distribution of it was it was really distributed through the docket 1805703 and then again through 1905713. But it's really just an internal summary of things that we consider all the time.
For the benefit of regulators.
So you made it for those dockets.
And customers. Well, yeah, but it was created for the benefit of regulators, yeah.
Right. So you made it for those dockets, right?
Yes. That we made the report for those dockets.
Yeah.
Right. But it's really just
Make
a summary.
decisions on
Yeah.
your own.
And I think from there I will pass it to Mr. Platt. I think I had 13 slides.
45 minutes.
Yeah.
That's pretty
Better than
good.
one slide
Yeah,
in
normally
45.
it's one slide.
That's impressive.
Well below my head.
So we got a number of questions about the location and what the RFP was for, and so I've got a lot of slides to cover a number of questions that all hit the same thing. So stay with me. I'll get there. But this RFP specifically was designed to collect services with similar capabilities in terms of system performance, and system performance and location are tied together. So it's hard to not have location be part of that. No parameters have changed. No gate stations exist within this optimal delivery location, and I'll kind of explain that here in a second. The triangle signifies locations where pressures are separated and regulated from 471 in the north, which you can't really see that well based on my white text, but it says 471, and 354 in the south. So I want you to go on a little journey with me here into something that I hope is more intuitive. But imagine for a second that our system is actually a water pipeline. And we've got 354 pounds over here, 471 pounds over here. We might have some demands out here at the end, and this optimal delivery location is like the separation between these two different pressure pipes, okay? Gross oversimplification, I hope it helps. So if we had a supply reliability resource come in at Bluffdale, and the pressure drop through the pipe occurs before we hit that, we have gate stations in the 471 area that are bringing in gas, increasing the pressure and bringing volume so that we can deliver to our customers. above 125, which is our minimum operational pressure, gas doesn't flow when the pressures on the 354 side are lower than the pressures on the 471 side. So the only way that you get water, and if you remember like physics class or science from when you were a kid, you had a cup with a card in the middle and you filled up water on one side, and when you pulled the card up, it equalized, right? So this signifies gas would be flowing the opposite direction. Bluffdale isn't the optimal location due to the fact that gas will not flow north at sufficient pressure. So unless you can have pressures higher than the pressures on the 471 side, you're not going to flow.
Could you add a compressor?
So could you add a compressor? Now in this scenario, what would you do here? You could compress from this side north. Compression, and this is just my opinion as a distribution engineer, I don't like compression personally because I think bigger pipe's always a better option. I've had arguments with my coworkers on a number of occasions, and compressor stations are proposed often. And almost always bigger pipe's better. So could you potentially install a huge compressor station right there that's capable of flowing 150 million cubic feet? That's possible, but it would add significant cost. Yes, Carol?
So on your graph there, you have this, at that yellow point, but through time, is this time or is this location? Because
This is location.
At that far right, it is below the 354.
Well, so what I'm saying is that this is a physical location, and at that location, you will not have flow between these two places unless the pressure on this side, or in this example, the height on this side is higher than the height on this side. Does that make sense?
That is at one point in time.
Well, at any point in time, if the pressure over here is higher, it's not going to flow that way. At any point in time. So if there's a point in time when the pressure on this side drops below the pressure on this side, gas can flow that way.
Okay, all right. That's
Right. So that's actually my next slide here. It's possible to reduce the gate station pressure such that your pressure at this optimal delivery location equalizes and gas flows, but then the problem is that at the end of the system, and I've done system models, you lose thousands of customers. That's a problem for me.
So that's, the right side is to simulate those that are on the far extreme of the
On the north
distributions.
side, Brigham City.
Okay.
So because you dropped the gate station capacity here, you're dropping below 125 at the end of the line?
Right, not capacity, but pressure.
Pressure, yeah, I'm sorry.
So you could have the same volume coming through, but you let the system drop in pressure so you can pass volume from south to north. So this is the south and north. Your pressure at the end of the system will drop, and the result will be losing thousands of customers. So if I reduce the pressure loss in this part of the system, it has minimal benefit because I'm already close to the top of this. So regardless, you've got hundreds of miles to get to that north end of the system. You can add pipe. It doesn't really help unless you get to the place where you hit 471 at a pressure higher than 354. So, go.
So why do we have a system that has two different pressures?
How long do you have? Because I could challenge Will for the longest slide ever if we talk about it. So if you look at the regulations pre-1970, pressure tests were not required. And Mike, you can step in anytime you want. So in 1970, you'll hear us say pre-1970 plus 1970 a lot. In 1970, the requirements became a lot higher, and pressure tests were required. And for pipe that was installed pre-1970, we were allowed, the industry was allowed, to use the operating pressure, maximum recorded operating pressure, between 1965 and 1970. So why 354? Because that's what was measured. Nobody picked that, like, I think that's a great number. So we went back and reviewed, and that's what the MAOPs became, the maximum allowable operating pressures. So, and if you think about it, it makes sense. I mean, it's kind of always operated that way.
So then have you done any sort of analysis to try to increase the MLP?
So, do you know that the little small cost program that we have replacing our aging infrastructure?
But I'm talking about those pipes.
Right, and I'm talking about those pipes.
So you
Those
haven't
pipes
gone
are
in
on
with
these systems, and until they're replaced, we cannot safely upgrade.
Well, there are companies that do, that go through old pipe, pressure test them, and increase the MALP.
Pre-1970 pipe? I don't think we're one of those companies.
So you're just not gonna do it?
Well, first of all, I'm not an integrity engineer, I'm a system planning engineer, but me
Well, I'm not
personally,
either.
I don't like risk. So, and I don't like the idea of, so.
I'm just saying it happens, and I'm asking you if you do it or if you don't.
We have not done it.
We don't feel comfortable doing it. I mean, if you're talking about pre-regulation pipe, that you're actually increasing the pressure without doing, most of these pipes you can't do internal assessments on, so you can't see what kind of anomalies you have or may not know about. You don't know anything about them. If you repressure test them, you might actually cause more harm than good. You might actually cause some of those anomalies to fail, and then you're replacing that pipe anyway. So we're comfortable operating the pipes at what we've historically done. Any anomalies that would be in those pipes right now would be classified as stable anomalies. We're doing ECDA surveys, those types of things to classify those anomalies and make sure that the pipe is safe. But going beyond that and increasing the stress on a pipe of that nature, no, that's not a good move. Where we have done uprates before is on post-70 pipe, where we do exactly what you're talking about, where we increase the pressure in increments of 25%. We do a leak survey, we make sure that we're not detecting any leaks. Typically, it's small diameter piping. This stuff is 20, 24-inch pipe.
That's how you just...
In highly populated areas, it's just not something we're comfortable with.
Well, and we don't have the level of records that we.
That's the other important portion of it. A lot of these, the regulations allowed you to assume an operating pressure, like Mike talked about, an MAOP, but they also allowed you to assume a yield stress. If you didn't know what the yield stress was, you could assume that pipe was made of 24,000 PSI steel, and you could base all your calculations on that. That's still a very dodgy thing to say then, okay, yeah, we feel comfortable assuming a material strength, assuming, excuse me, assuming what the grade, the condition of the pipe is in, and increasing the pressure in a highly populated area. It's,
after almost 100 years of operation in some cases.
right.
So,
I understand.
does that help?
I have a question before you leave this slide. I understand what you're saying, that on the right side of the 471 tank, if you will, or the sort of the extremes of that northern system, what sort of flow rate are you assuming between the 354 and the 471 about how much you can replenish, backfill that gas? I mean, is that based on the sort of limits of the system, or what are we assuming here?
Really, so in the models that I've run, it really has to do with what the pressure differential is. Because I'm lucky, I can install a regulator that will pass whatever I want. I just click a number and I put it in there. It's just not enough based on the pressure differential that you'll get there.
And I'm trying to figure that part of it out. So have you all done studies to determine at what point you lose sufficient pressure at the extremes of the system, and then tried to figure out what you would need to do at the front end of the system, and whether it's physically possible to do that? That's kind of what I'm getting at.
So we've done a lot of analysis.
And really, so the best way to get volumes through here is to have a higher pressure than 471 here. Because think about a peak day for a second. This is a picture, and I'm hoping it illustrates something, but on a peak day, we are going to pack our system up as high as we possibly can, right? Going into the morning pull, we will have the highest pressure as possible. There will not be gas flowing from 354 to 471. Zero.
Not if the right side's higher than 354.
Right.
Right.
That's how, and then when the demand comes, this pressure starts to drop. Now, even in some scenarios, this pressure at this point, because it's not an open pipe and it's not water, can drop below the pressure on the 354 side, and volumes can flow for a minute. But how much does 5 million do? It's not 150. You know what I mean? It's not a significant amount. So this is a picture. It fluctuates throughout the day, and we put as much pressure in the system as possible so that we can meet a peak day in the first place without a shortfall. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not sure it tells me what I need to know, but maybe I'm not asking the question the right way. Go ahead.
Well, I'm an
volume
engineer
you can
with
flow is based on the pressure differential between the two systems.
I get that.
The more pressure differential, the different volume. The problem is there's a lot of variables that impact what those pressures are, right? So on the right side, depending on which gate station feeding that is having an issue, what volume is missing coming into that system impacts what that pressure will be on that side. So it impacts what your pressure differential is. So then it's a different amount of volume. So yeah, I think Mike's run scenarios on just about each gate station and what impact it would have, and which volumes make the most sense and which ones you can flow. So I think it varies a lot.
and that's almost 100% correct, except for the just about part. I have run analysis on every single gate station. So,
And maybe to answer your question, I don't think we can develop enough of a pressure differential to develop enough of a volume that makes a difference. Does that make sense? So by the time, if you have 354 on the left side as your fixed number, by the time you lower the pressure enough to be able to create enough of a capacity across there, you're way too low, and it just doesn't move the needle.
That's what I was asking. Thanks.
Okay.
so now let's look at an optimal delivery location scenario. If instead we operate the specified area at 720 pounds, which it will all be designed to do that, there will be regulation to do that, you have plenty of pressure to push the volume that you need in either direction. So that's what makes this location optimal. That's what makes it special. So you've moved now from delivering from Bluffdale to delivering to these 3 feeder lines, which provide that level of pressure. Right.
Anywhere on those 3 feeder lines?
Anywhere on those 3 feeder lines.
Okay.
Where are they? Is that what the question was?
Anywhere.
Oh, anywhere.
Yes, anywhere on those 3 feeder lines. Now you might be asking, and maybe you're not, but 21-10 was identified in the RFP and not included here. It's very short, and I didn't want to talk about it, so now I've talked about it anyway. But it's not on there.
So that didn't work.
Wow.
So I do have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry. So if that's your pipe system, those aquifers right there, what happens if you move that gas is flowing column?
The ideal area?
What happens if you move it?
What happens if you move it to the right? What happens if it's a mile down the system? What happens if it's a mile outside that triangle?
A mile?
And it's
You
still
mean
on?
like that much more?
Yeah. Yeah, really. I know, maybe that's a stupid question, but.
No, it's not a
But if
stupid
it's
question.
on feeder lines 12, 13, or 33, what happens if it's still on one of those feeder lines and right next to the triangle but not in it? Does it create any operational pressure? It's still on the 471 PSI side.
So I think what you're getting at is if something was a mile this way or a mile this way, how would we deal with that in our evaluation?
Well, we would run a line to this area so that we can take advantage of that pressure.
So you'd run a mile more,
Right.
unless it was on 12, 13, or 33, then you wouldn't need to. Is that
You
true?
wouldn't need to, right.
Which is what you saw in some of the options that were presented. We had to add in reinforcement costs to do exactly what you're saying, get to that area.
Well, and even all the options required some pipeline to get to these existing feeder lines. So it's a common thing among all things evaluated that pipeline had to be added to get to this optimal delivery. Yeah.
So in order to get to that 650 to 720, you basically had to put in the pipe to handle that and get it upgraded to handle that pressure, right?
The pipe that's there is either been replaced or will be replaced with 720 capable pipeline.
Right. So you're creating, you're going out and digging the trench and putting it in to be able to do that.
Which would happen regardless of whether or not any supplier reliability resource.
But in order to get there, that's what's had to happen.
Yeah, an uprate has to happen.
Okay.
So as I understand it, this difference in the pressures has existed for some time, right?
Oh, yeah.
So what was it about the Bluffdale location that made it acceptable last time around, but it's not this time?
Well, acceptable, so if you.
I get that we're using the word optimal,
So-
but why didn't we optimize the location the last time around?
So I want you to use, you're a lawyer, right?
Indeed.
So use your lawyer brain and recall something that was said during the last docket. Our analysis last time, according to Mr. Neal, was not acceptable because it was not apples to apples. And so why was it not acceptable? Because you can get a lot more capability out of this optimal delivery location than you can delivering over here. So that's why we specified it in the RFP. And if you also recall, there were lots of options that weren't anything like this discussed in that document. Right?
There was a lot discussed in that document, and we'll agree on that.
There were a lot of options.
Sure.
Another question is, as we were talking about, you know, imagining the Brigham City, kind of the periphery of the system over there, are there any tools that you have in your system, compressor stations, as it flows north to those outskirts that can repressurize it and get it higher so it doesn't dip below 125?
We do not have compressor stations on this system. And compression, and Mike can jump in, is very expensive. So when you're talking about increasing the amounts of volume that we have flowing down these pipelines, it adds up quick. It adds up really quick. Eric.
Sorry, I just want to clarify. It depends on the size of the compressor.
It depends on the size of compressor.
Right, so if you're doing one in Brigham City to bring it from 120 to 125, that would be much different than the 450 to 750.
Well, let's think about this. Let's think about this for a second, okay?
I'm trying to.
If Hiram has a shortfall of 150,000, and you're trying to raise the pressure, let's just say 50 pounds, it doesn't really matter. You have to pass 150,000 through it, right?
Okay.
Because you just lost that.
Yeah. Or something like that.
So, and the problem with this question, and I'm glad we're all thinking, is if you install that compressor for the Hiram outage, then you added a significant amount of cost to increase the pressure right here. But what happens if it's sunset? Then you have to install compression here. What happens if it's Porter's Light? Then you have to install compression here. It gets to be unmanageable. Like I said, I'm biased. I don't like compression.
Well, it's expensive too. I mean, we haven't looked at the cost, but I would imagine that would be a much more expensive option.
Well, if you think about some of the compressor stations that go in, it's significant cost. And the
volumes that we're talking about here are not insignificant. Okay.
So, I mean, we're just talking about pressure differences. Why couldn't you put that, the 650 anywhere in the 471 range? Because it's always gonna flow to the lowest pressure area, right?
This is a simplification.
Right.
So I want you to think about the system as it actually is, and we'll just do it on this plane. We have Payson that's over here.
Okay.
We have Riverton, Hunter Park, Little Mountain, which feeds in pipes on both sides, Porter's Lane, Sunset, and Hiram.
Right.
It's not that simple. You're going to have, if you brought in more volume here, you'll have to install more pipe to get that volume this way. If you have volume at Porter's Lane and Sunset and Hiram coming in already. You see what I'm saying?
It won't just equalize the pressure in the system.
If it were that easy, they wouldn't pay me to do what I do.
So in other words, if you put a compression station out at the end, okay, but as you were saying, you lost pressure earlier up, and it's going to drop the pressure down here, and you have your compression station over there, and you turn it on to increase the pressure going out so you don't lose Brigham City. What happens in that scenario then? Do you lose somebody else up the line, or do you not have the ability, you have the compression station, but you don't have the ability to make it work?
So let me see if I understand what you're saying. You're saying Hiram's operating, you have a compressor station, and you've lost Riverton.
Okay, something happens upstream that's causing you to lose pressure out of Brigham City.
Right.
And you have a compression station out towards that end of the line.
Right.
Okay, and that's where you have it. What happens with that compression station if you turn it on to boost that up, but your problem is up line somewhere?
So if your problem happens anywhere up here, and Hiram's operating, and you've got compression feeding that direction to the north, your pressures in the north, because Hiram's operating, are up here. That compression isn't doing anything. You're wasting energy.
Well, you've got something that's happened upstream that's going to cause you to lose pressure in Brigham City.
But that's what I'm saying, is it's not. This is a simplification.
Right.
If I lost this gate station, for example, and I had gate stations here, compression here, gate station here, the pressure here would drop, right? The pressure at this location would drop. Now, without a supply reliability resource, pressures everywhere around this start to drop. And then it spreads out. So when you get to the point where pressure here is 125 or whatever the bottom limit where you start compressing, that compressor could come on, but at that time you're losing volume out the bottom so fast there's nothing left to compress there. You might be able to section it off and say, okay, from Brigham City to Preston, we're going to keep these customers because Hiram works.
Is it a situation you start your compressor and it just makes the valley upstream even lower? So you.
I don't think that it would, but really, you're going to lose height or pressure in the whole system. If you had compression, hypothetically, could it reduce the pressure here and increase the pressure here? I mean, in this scenario, yeah, I mean, it could. But I think that it's a lot more complicated.
Part of the problem is you have to keep in mind we're not a straight line pipeline that we're talking about here. It's not one pipe, it's interconnected pipe. So you can't just put one compressor and think it fixes the whole area, right? If you've got four lines
in other
going
words,
in there.
it reveals a problem somewhere else.
Yeah, you're interconnected, so you've got to put multiple compressors and bring the whole pressure up on one part of the system. So it's not always just one pipe feeding.
Right, so in other words, having the compression station out there, you do that, it's just gonna reveal a problem somewhere else.
You still need supply.
Right, in other words.
Compression only goes so far, if you don't have
If
supply.
you use your water scenario here, all of a sudden you have a tank that's just dry, you don't have anything to push.
It's not
So you can turn
pumping
your
anything
compressor on,
anymore
it's like
because there's nothing.
turning your bilge pump on when it's not in the water, it's just not gonna push anything out.
But that's only if it's severe enough. If it were not severe enough,
But
it would only dip the rest of it.
But compression without supply, as Tina said, will not make a difference. You will still lose pressure.
Right. Assuming you have sufficient, well, assuming you don't lose enough supply so that you go dry somewhere.
Right, it has to be a very insignificant amount of volume. But yeah. I don't like compression. I've said it. I'll say it again. Ask me next week. It's not a good option. So, someone asked about tangible, or I guess there was a question about tangible system benefits from reinforcements that were added to some of the options, and we evaluated all the models and proposals to determine the benefits as proposed. Other analysis included determining the necessary minimum system required to provide the benefit, similar benefits. The minimum systems did not provide additional benefit beyond that, so there were no tangible other benefits. Okay.
So I'm not quite sure I understood the question or your answer. So
that must not have been your question.
So is the idea that in order to evaluate each proposal, you said, what's the minimum we'd have to do?
How do we minimize the costs?
Right. To get that option to work.
To have a similar benefit, right?
So there is a certain amount of benefits then that are incorporated into that. So,
Right,
I
that
guess
bring it up to-
where I'm getting to is, so you've put in some infrastructure to make that proposal work. But you're not calling on that resource all the time. So isn't there just some incremental benefits to the system of having that infrastructure?
So I'm gonna go back a ways, and I'm gonna, this map probably isn't the best, I should have brought another map. But if this is the area that we're talking about, and we have a resource out here in Magna, and that includes a line to this area.
Yeah.
There are no customers on that line. That line doesn't do anything but get gas from that resource to the optimal delivery location.
Okay.
There are no additional benefits. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
It's sitting there, and I mean, I guess we could calculate the insignificant amount of line pack that it adds, but it's really not providing benefit.
So can I follow up, because I didn't understand that answer either. It sounds like what you're saying is you said the system you're proposing has these benefits, and now we're gonna make all the other proposals match that in all respects.
Basics.
Okay.
Not in all respects, but in system results, right? I mean, there are some things that LNG will do that other options won't. There are
And
some.
and vice versa.
And vice versa.
But that assumes that you're starting with the set of benefits that the LNG provides is the optimal set of benefits.
I think the better way to look at it is not you're looking at a set of benefits, you're looking at a need. Our need is to be able to withstand a shortfall of up to 150,000 at any one of our gate stations.
Well, that's what you defined your need as.
Well, that's what we, as the operator, define our need as.
Right.
And that's what we wanted those solutions to be able to meet, that need. And when we evaluated the proposals, we looked, did it meet that need? Yes or no? If it didn't, what would we have to do to our system to allow it to meet that need? And that was part of the analysis.
I'm just saying you start with that specified need that includes in that specific location.
Well, I think it's independent of the location. The need is independent of the location. The need is,
isn't what he just went through saying it's important, the location. Not just 150, but at that location because of the pressure issues. You defined that as the need, and then you compared whether any of the others met the need that specific proposal offered, right?
No, I think that we identified that location because we identified that location performs best. That's not the need. it could be located anywhere, and we said we were open to evaluating options anywhere. But we have to include the minimum system to meet the need, as Mike said.
But that's what you said earlier, though, is that, for example, if they wanted to have an injection point, say at Sunset, if Sunset's gate is not the issue, you've already got gas flowing there, then you'd have to have additional pipeline in order to accept,
Right,
to get it to flow on your system to where you do need it.
It becomes very complicated outside that location, outside that area.
But the fact remains, if we were to receive, regardless of where it tied into our system, if we were to receive an option that met the criteria of being able to withstand an outage at any one of those gate stations, regardless of where it tied in, then we wouldn't have brought it to this point. We wouldn't have added anything to it. It would have been, okay, that's their solution and it works across the board. The problem was we got solutions that didn't meet the need in that term. So then we said, okay, here's what would need to happen to make it satisfy the solution, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was just trying to reiterate what he said earlier.
Oh, sorry.
So I think we're saying the same thing, is that
Yeah.
receiving it at that optimal point, there's a reason why it's the optimal point.
Right.
Right.
And I think
And don't ask me to explain what those reasons are. But
So the question itself that we were trying to address here was asking about, did we evaluate tangible benefits provided by other bids? If they come from a larger pipeline or whatever, but really we specifically called out and asked for any of those other bids to specify what other benefits they might be able to apply so that we could evaluate those and kind of give them a tangible value. So in instances where they did that, we looked at those and said, okay, here's some other value that it can provide, and we specifically asked for them to call that out. So we did evaluate them and give them benefits if they propose them. We looked to see on our system, okay, if this is another benefit, but in most cases we were putting it on the proposal to say, hey, what other benefits can you provide? Think of other things that you can give us that we can add value, and we'll add that value to it. So in those instances, we did.
Another question I have is just in regards to the size of the tank, the 150,000. Has there been any sort of forecasting with the growth rate of your customer base? How long the 150,000 is an adequate amount for backup? Does that make sense? What I'm asking is there a point in time where we can maybe identify that the growth has been too much, that 150,000 isn't enough to sustain the system, or?
So, I don't know if you want to add something to that, Kara, but I don't think that we've looked long term, but this is what I can intuit and feel. 150,000 is what we've seen in cuts from supply shortfalls. Demand growth needs to have supply behind it, right? So as the system grows, the supply should grow as well. So if the amount of shortfalls grows as well, that's when we'll have a problem, not the demand. Because if we're not meeting our customers' demands as they grow, then we have bigger problems, right?
And then the other thing to kind of keep in mind is our system is married to what our supply is, right? We know how much supply we're bringing onto the system. Pipes have been sized, facilities have been sized to match that. So to Mike's point, if you have a 150,000 drop in what you were counting on coming in, it's kind of independent of how your system growth.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I can see that.
But the 150,000 is just for a day, but the tank is much bigger than that. That's correct?
Right, but that's the
Yeah.
daily rate.
Right. And so, based on his question, if you were gonna do something, that's all that you're designing it to be able to deliver is 150,000.
Right. So another question was the satellite LNG facilities that are in the proposal as potential benefits. If we deliver to them, how does that impact the storage that we have in the LNG? So if they use all winter and a normal, average, and colder scenario, the amount of gas storage that they would take in those scenarios, assuming that we didn't intermittently fill it up as weather permitted, which I think is a big assumption, we would impact the total amount of storage by half a day. And that is much less than the 30% of the tank that we need to use just to keep the gas from sweetening over time per year. So does that answer that question?
I don't know.
So that
Try
is
to explain that one more time.
All the satellite usage is very minimal in terms of the total storage for the whole heating season.
This is the heating season, not for an annual period. This is heating season.
This is heating season,
Okay.
so this. So I think that I'm gonna sit down now and let Kelly take the reins.
Yeah, so before I begin, I just want to point out that when we went through this yesterday, my colleagues voted this slide as the least interesting and most boring slide in the entire presentation. So you can watch me present and see if you agree with them or not. So what this is, it's a bunch of, there are a bunch of questions in number 9, and they had relatively simple answers, so I just put the answers down on the slide. I'm just going to go through them real quick. So when we use the term transportation customers, we're talking about all transportation customers, both firm and interruptible. There was a question about whether our tariff allows us to provide standby or backup service to transportation customers. The answer is no. They're on their own for supply. There's a question on historically how have we managed transportation customer supply imbalances, and I'm going to go into that in a little more detail in a minute, but it's in the past it's been through fees and penalties. There's a question about how do we know if the facility gets built, whether the daily vaporization rate is enough to meet our supply cut needs, and I think the answer to that is we have pretty good data, both with respect to how much we can vaporize in a day and how much of a cut we have on our system on any given day. So it's simply a matter of pulling that data and doing a comparison to see if we're able to meet our need. There were multiple questions on telemetry. All of our transportation customers have telemetry. You're required to have telemetry to be a transportation customer, and that allows us to have hourly data on our customers. So we have a good idea on how much those transportation customers are using. And then there was a question on, do we have any other methods of controlling customers' receipt of system supply? I mean, theoretically, I guess we could physically go out and turn our customers off, but I don't think Gary and Philip would be happy about that, and realistically, it's impractical on a cold winter day to expect that to be a reasonable option. So that kind of answers that set of questions. So we have 4 different levers that we use to help manage transportation customer imbalances. The first one is we have monthly supply imbalances. So we allow our customers to be plus or minus 5% on their supply, and by the end of the month they need to be trued up. And they can exchange those imbalances with other customers. And so that's the first thing that we do. That's been in place for many years. Then we have the daily imbalance charge. So that's a daily charge that we assess to customers for every decatherm outside of a 5% imbalance that they have on any given day. So we actually take a snapshot every single day of how much they use versus how much they nominated, and anything over 5% gets assessed 8 cents. That was instituted in 2014, I believe. Then we have restrictions on daily imbalance or operational flow orders, and that's been in place for many years. And how that works is in a day when our system is constrained, we can issue one of these, and I'll show you a little more detail on that in a moment. But basically what happens is if the customer falls outside of that restriction, we can charge them either $1 or the greater of the price differential for the day, so they don't game the system. And they pay that as a penalty.
Kelly, the one clarification on that, it's not necessarily the system is constrained. Those are more used when supply is constrained.
Right.
So it's
You know, an
it
interruption
more has
would
to do
be
with supply
system
upstream.
constrained. You're right. Thank you for that clarification. The last one is whole burn to scheduled quantity. This is a relatively new item that we have. This was approved last year. And so how this works, this is kind of an elevated restriction where we put customers on a whole burn, and they, to the extent they're outside of what they nom, the first 10% they pay $5 a decatherm. Once they hit 10% and go outside of that range, it's $25 a decatherm. So a little bit of a higher penalty to incent them to be within their nominations.
And that whole burn is specifically during times of supply shortfall, right?
Right.
That's right. That's exactly.
We're expected supply shortfalls.
Yeah.
Right. Fair
We try and
enough.
call it ahead
Yeah.
to be conservative.
Yes.
Yep. So just to give you a little bit of an idea on how often these are used. So this is a table that shows the restriction. So this is the dollar penalty or the higher the cost of gas. You can see this is for the winter heating seasons for the last 6 years. And we have flexibility on what kind of restriction we issue. So you can see the first column is a 5% draft limit. So basically what that's saying is you can be drafting us, you can be using 5% of our supply as part of your usage. Once you go over that amount, you're going to get penalized. And you can see we use that a lot in 2013, 2014, 2014, 2015. Then you've got the no draft, which is basically you need to be either bringing more gas than you're going to use or burning exactly what you use. And so there's basically no tolerance. And you can see in the last winter heating season, we used that one a little bit more. And then you've got one that's plus or minus 5% either way. So basically, we just want you to be within your nomination within 5%, either over or under. And you can see in the last couple of winter heating seasons, we've used that one quite a bit. And then other is just, it's either, I can't remember what they were. Some of them were 5% one way or 10% one way. But they're not as frequent as these others. So you can see last winter heating season, for example, we put this into effect 27 different days. You can see the history for the last 6 winter heating seasons.
And just a real quick note, the no draft, we've in working with the agents and transportation customers, we've kind of tended to go more towards a no draft than the plus or minus 5% limit, because the feedback we got is it's harder for them to manage directly to that limit. They're more likely to get penalized if you have a plus or minus 5% limit, because they can't just bring a little bit more than they expect to use and be covered. If they bring a little bit more than they expect to use, they could wind up bringing too much and get penalized. So the feedback we got is the preference would be do a no draft,
one-sided,
and therefore if they err on the bring more gas side, and not on the less gas side. So then
It helps with imbalances as well. So
right, yeah. So that's why we've tended to go with that more frequent.
So looking at the more punitive, so these are interruptions, and this is before we had the hold burn option. I think if you were to if we could go back in a time machine and we had the hold burn option back in 2013, these probably all 3 would have been hold burns. Is that safe to say?
I think we've had that discussion about the January 6th one.
Yeah, I'm going to reserve judgment on that on the January 6th one. I'd have to look back.
What I will say then is
I'm going to not agree with
what
you.
I will say is this is the more punitive option. This is not a restriction. This is basically if you don't bring your gas. And the penalty at the time was higher than the whole burn. This was about a $45 penalty. So we've had 3 of these in the last 6 winter heating seasons. The first one was December 5th. It was a 3-hour interruption. 150 of 272 customers were penalized $133,000. December 31st of 2014, that interruption was almost a day. 72 customers, about $500,000. And then the most recent one was January 6, 2017. That was almost a day of interruption. And you can see each interruption we have more and more transportation customers. So the dollars are getting bigger, but I think that's due in part because the number of customers is getting bigger and the number of customers being penalized is bigger. So in January 6 of 2017, 275 customers penalized for $1.3 million. And the way these penalties work, they actually go back to customers through the infrastructure tracker replacement as a credit. So this is where actually transportation customers who are not within their nominations are paying a penalty. That penalty is going back to customers to reimburse them for their supply. So that gives you kind of a summary of how we've used some of these levers in the past few winter heating seasons to manage transportation customer balances.
I think it's worth noting, we did call a hold burn to scheduled quantity restriction one time this past heating season. We were expecting some severe cold weather. We were concerned there could be shortfalls, and the cold weather never materialized. So we sent out the hold burn restriction. We actually canceled it before the restrictions started so that nobody would be penalized, because that cold weather that was causing us the concern and expecting those shortfalls didn't actually materialize. So we, before anybody got penalized or before it caused any problems, we actually called off the restriction. So I think it's worth noting, though, that we did come close to using it, but to kind of keep everything.
Yeah. And before we issue that hold burn, I'm assuming we had the normal restriction in place.
Yes.
In the days leading up,
Yeah.
And then it kind of gets height or elevated, right? All right, I think it's Tina's turn.
Good afternoon, everyone. Feel like we need a stretch break or a bathroom break or something, or at least an engineer
Does
joke.
anybody want a break?
Engineer joke, I'd rather.
Would you? What do you think?
I'm just asking.
Artie just wants a joke.
I know, I was trying to think of an engineer joke. Well, yesterday I was saying in the same meeting with my colleagues, looking at these slides, that when I went to college, I thought engineers drove trains. And now they're everywhere. I don't know.
That wasn't
that's,
bad, Tina, that wasn't bad. And at least it wasn't a lawyer job.
And it was clean, right? Okay, so one of the questions was about customer meetings. Yes, we hold one every year prior to the heating season. A lot of you have attended those over the years. We discuss nominations, interruptions, penalties. We provide updates on issues relevant to TS class, usually related to an upcoming rate case that may or may not happen over the past few years, but that's what we like to discuss. We will have one again this fall. Okay, now I'm going to look around the room, and unfortunately, aging myself again, or dating myself again, who has any recollection of what the nickel waiver program is besides Gary Dodge?
I do.
Okay, so.
I've read about it. Does
You're
that
in good
count?
company. No.
That's before your time.
Oh, I don't remember it. Maybe.
So, just for
Artie, come on.
I don't
matter of
remember
like
what it
history,
is.
historically,
Does it have anything to do with the nickel defense in football?
Good, very good. Okay, so it does not. Way back in the day, again, too long ago to remember for most people in this room, but we had a program that the interruptible customers, we had a lot of them back then, well, not a lot, but a bigger percentage of our customers were interruptible. They would sign an agreement with us that gave them a nickel discount on the transportation rate if they agreed, when interrupted, to sell their gas supply to Mountain Fuel at the time. Is that right, Gary, or was it Westar? It was Mountain Fuel Resources.
It was Mountain Fuel when it
Yeah.
started, certainly. Yeah.
So, back in the day, we would do that, and they would interrupt and we would get their gas, and then there would be an accounting nightmare where we would try to decide how much gas we'd taken and pay them 6 months later, probably. And that was great. But over time, that went away, and what happened is they were just obligated by way of the tariff that said if they were interrupted, they had to sell us the gas. It didn't talk about pricing or anything like that. So that became an issue for a number of reasons. One of them was because it wasn't they were obligated to sell us gas, but their gas may or may not be even available. And fewer customers were actually interruptible at that point in time. So it wasn't a good source of gas supply. In the current tariff, it's been changed. So there's no obligation for us to buy or for them to sell to us. And I think some of you will recall the reason for that change is because it's not reliable. There's no way to force that to happen for them to get the gas. If it's interrupted as well, if they have a shortfall, there's no way, obligation for them to sell gas to us. So hopefully that answered whatever question that was, 16. There was a question about how many customers there are. This shows now 48 interruptible customers out of a total of 957 customers. The world's a lot different now than the nickel waiver days. Total usage, 98 BCF, basically, rough numbers. And the top 5 interruptible usage is 1.7. So that is basically 1.7% of the total. Very, very small, as I said. And they are not required, and back in the day in the nickel waiver, the part I forgot is they were supposed to certify that they had an alternate fuel supply they would switch to, so then, their process wouldn't be interrupted if we interrupted their gas and used their gas. Did I miss anything, Gary, on the
That's pretty.
nickel waiver? Okay. So the question was, are they required, or do we require them to have alternate fuel? They're not required by us. Some hospitals, I'm assuming, nursing homes would be required by other agencies to have alternate fuel, but we are not part of that discussion. Okay, Mr. Gill.
Oh, ready. All right, so there was a number of questions regarding siting of the LNG facilities, and I wanted to just go into a little bit. Some of the questions were regarding the main facility, the one we're seeking approval for, and then there was a few questions regarding some of these satellite facilities that were included as some exhibits and pre-feed studies. So basically, the siting requirement is that for 49 CFR Part 193, which is the code which regulates LNG facilities, you cannot be any closer than 1 mile from the end of a runway longer than, I believe, 3,200 feet in length. So an international airport size runway, you cannot be any closer than 1 mile to that. Our facility located near Magna is more than 5 miles away from the nearest airport runway. So therefore, there is no FAA approval required for this site. The potential satellite, and I want to highlight the word potential, would be designed in accordance with any applicable code requirements. So what we've done to date is just a high-level look at satellite facilities, determine an order of magnitude cost that we could compare against serving those communities via pipeline. So we haven't really gone out and looked at sites, we haven't talked to landowners, we haven't done anything like that other than saying, okay, here's potentially where an LNG facility, a satellite facility could be located. Here would be the costs associated with bringing utilities, roads, that sort of thing to that site. Here's the cost for constructing the site. So, so regarding any questions regarding the satellite facilities, there's really nothing in terms of permitting. I should also point out the satellite facilities are a much different animal than what we're proposing near Magna. The height of the tanks, they're horizontal bullet tanks, so the maximum height of those tanks is about 17 to 20 feet off the ground. Probably the tallest structure around those facilities will be the power lines actually coming into the facility. So it's not likely that they would even trigger an FAA approval at that point.
So do you just hook the pipe up to a truck and fill the LNG facility at these satellite places? Or do you have to cool it?
No, you don't have to cool it. So basically, all the liquefaction is done at the main facility. There's a trucking terminal at that facility which would fill up an insulated truck. which would then truck to the site where you're basically filling up storage tanks at that site to then vaporize from those storage tanks. Does that make sense?
Vaporize into a main from that facility.
Yeah, so you don't need any other additional cooling?
No. You basically have storage tanks and you have a vaporization facility. So you have heat exchangers to basically take it from a liquid form back into a gaseous form. You have odorization to odorize it and then put it back into your system. As far as the plant staffing, and these are the kind of the numbers we put into our OpEx estimates for the facility. What we contemplated is that you would have a day shift you would have a facility manager, mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, somebody responsible for the mechanical maintenance of the facility, and then one for the electrical and instrumentation maintenance. And then in addition to that, you would have 3 shifts. So you'd have a day shift with 2 additional operators, and then 2 quote-unquote night shifts that would have 2 operators per shift. And then we added to those 2 operators per shift kind of a floater, if you will, because you're going to have to account for time off, vacations, sick leave, and all those types of things. So the total count is that there'd be 4 people per operator position. That would account for the 3 shifts plus 1 to cover for the vacations. Some of this has been talked about before in terms of what we would do without disruptions. I believe this question specifically asked if we were serving satellite communities, but we did not have a disruption, what would we do with the LNG? And basically, we would keep the plant full and in reserve until probably mid-February. And then we could use it as needed for price optimization or until it's down to that kind of 70% mark.
What does price optimization mean?
So Tina could probably speak to that better than I could, but how I view it is that it's the gas that you have stored is a cheaper commodity than you could buy on the open market, for example.
Do you think that's the case?
I don't know, Tina, do you want to talk to that?
I tried to do a catch-all phrase, which probably wasn't ideal, but the idea was sometimes we're looking at, do we buy gas, put it in storage, potentially, Clay Basin? Is it cheaper to, if we needed to get 30% of this out, we'd look every day, kind of that's what we know Will's group does, is optimize supply. And so it might be aquifer, putting it into the aquifers, it might be putting it into Clay Basin, it might be replacing $10 gas on February 26th because it's a Tuesday after a holiday. You know, those kinds of things, because sometimes it's more expensive. So it'd just go into our supply stack as, instead of calling on peaking gas if it was less expensive. You know what I mean? It's a sunk cost, we have to get the gas out. That's what I tried to do, catch all for.
So for me, that's the key, is that it's almost, I would consider this gas a sunk cost, because we really put it in there and paid the price for it to keep as this supply reliability resource. Once we get to that point and we have to use it, to me, that cost has already been paid for. It's already there. Now we've got to use 30% of this gas. So I would look at it and say, okay, what are the most expensive days that I'm going to buy gas? If I see prices are high, I'm going to use some of this gas rather than buying gas on those expensive days. It still may not be in the money if you just look straight at using it as storage for that reason, but that's not why it's there. So I look at the cost of the gas that's in there as kind of sunk because it's in there for reliability purposes. Once it's served that purpose through the heating season, that's why we look at mid-February. I'm going to think of it as sunk cost and use it on days where gas is expensive to offset high costs. So,
but based on the prices we've seen the last 2 winter heating seasons, I think we would be in the money.
potentially, but it's got to be after February though. So,
right.
So yeah, you'd look for those high price days in February and March where there's some constraints out there or something, and use it on those days.
So boil off gas. So boil off basically occurs as you're storing LNG. You're storing it cryogenically. You're doing the best job you can with insulated tanks and whatnot. But regardless, there's a portion of it that reverts back to gaseous form And then you have to do something with that. So the question was asked, does the vaporization rate of the facility have anything to do with the amount of boil off that basically happens out on your site? And the answer is no, it's largely independent. I say largely because there is a small portion of vaporization that could, a boil off that could occur as you're readying your plant for vaporization mode. So as you're taking gas from the tank to your vaporizers, there's a section of pipe that you don't want to just instantly shock with a ton of cryogenically frozen LNG. So basically you bring a portion of that LNG into the pipe and start to cool the pipe down to lower temperatures to a point where it can safely handle the remainder of the pipe, of the LNG coming in there. But once that's done, the vaporization rate is completely, the boil off is completely independent of the vaporization rate. As far as how we would handle the boil off, so if our plant is in vaporization mode, basically any boil off gas would go through an odorization and basically just be delivered into our system. If we're in the liquefaction mode, that gas is basically taken off the tank and put through the system and re-liquefied and put back into the system. Regardless, in any instance, the amount of boil off gas that you can count on is a really small number. Oops, sorry, I was going to try to point there. 0.07% per day. So it's not a large volume of gas, it's just something that you have to take into account. As far as satellite facilities go, we did try to make an estimate on the number of deliveries that would need to happen on some of these sites where it is far more economical to serve these communities with satellite facilities versus pipeline. So these three particular cities, you can see the counts here, average daily deliveries. The biggest one being Kanab, would need about 160 deliveries throughout the year. On warmest months, summer months, it's hardly any deliveries at all, only about 4 throughout the month. During the coldest months, you probably have about one a day, or 2 every 2 days, or 3 every 3 days. But basically 30 a month, thereabouts. But by and large, the average daily deliveries across the board is a small amount.
So how I don't know what the question is here. What is a delivery? Is that the truck arriving?
Yes.
Or is that the amount that you're delivering to the community?
That's a semi-truck.
Okay.
Delivering to that site and offloading the LNG into the storage at that site.
So Kanab, that's basically one delivery a day.
Approximately. No.
On the coldest.
In the cold months.
No, I mean on the coldest.
Oh, yes, on the coldest months, yes.
Yeah.
But that probably really wouldn't be, we have more than 1 day's worth of supply in the tanks. So what you'd probably do is take deliveries every 2 days or 3 days.
Okay.
Regardless, even at that amount, even if you were taking a delivery there a day, I don't think anybody notices. I mean, it's during the middle of the day. It's just part of the normal operating procedures of these facilities.
Do you have staffing requirements of these satellite facilities, or are they just, the truck pulls in and hooks up?
So you'll see, I believe in the pre-feed studies that were included, I think as part of my testimony, we looked at both options kind of. The thought being that some of these communities are small enough that you'd be opening remote offices there anyway for normal operating personnel, and that office could function as the office operating these facilities. We also looked at an option of maybe having a manned facility where you'd have 1 or 2 people at the site at all times. But to answer your question, the simplest way, yeah, you can operate these without somebody being there.
Is that West Wendover on the Utah side, or both
That
halves of
that
Wendover?
was just West Wendover, Utah side. We didn't include any of the Nevada side in that count.
So in terms of the cost estimates for the facilities, I think there was a question asking, why is there a plus or minus 50% and a 20% contingency? So, as I tried to point out before, keep in mind that this is a very preliminary look at these sites. And so what the plus or minus 50% estimate is trying to talk to is the amount of things that were put into the estimate, the level at which you are estimating. So instead of estimating a building at, a detailed estimate would estimate a building by saying, we need a foundation that costs this much, we need the girders, they need this much, we need all the frames, all the finish work, all that, and you would have itemized costs for all those, and that would build up your estimate. This level of estimate is basically looking at the building and say, a building costs about $12,000. So it's really talking to the level of work that was done to estimate that. That being said, each one of those line items, we still wanted to put a contingency on for unknowns of materials, unknown of the quantities that we were estimating. And so that's really speaking to the level of what we were doing on those. Any questions? Yes.
So I'm sorry if I missed this, but how are these communities currently, heating their homes? Would you say is it propane?
I think it's largely propane.
Okay,
Yes.
so there's no distribution system in
No.
these communities yet.
No.
So when the satellite system is up, how will the LNG be delivered to the homes? I
So
guess?
once it's vaporized and odorized, it's no different than any other natural gas.
Okay.
So it'd be just distributed through a distribution system, plastic mains and service lines that are connected to the homes and for meters.
Oh, okay. So will you have to build out that distribution
Yes, that would
system?
be part of, that would be part of the
Okay, got
build-out.
it, okay.
And I should point out, in my testimony, I think I have a comparison of cost between the pipeline for serving those communities and LNG. And in both those scenarios, I didn't account for the build-out of that system. I was saying, this is the base minimum cost to get gas to that town. Everything downstream of that would be like cost for either option, so.
Okay.
I'm sorry, yeah. So would these people need to buy new furnaces?
No. Well, if they're on propane, yeah. I don't know if furnaces, typically
It's just
the
a
big.
orifice change.
Yeah, typically a lot of equipment, furnaces range.
The older furnaces, like just an orifice change.
No, we actually had this conversation yesterday with one of our operations folks, and, because we were talking about some facilities, some towns up in Wyoming. And according to him, he said, really, your appliances and your furnaces, largely, it's just an orifice change. The cost that you would probably have to replace is the water heater. Because most propane water heaters are not rated to take natural gas. So you'd have to install a new water heater. But other than that, largely, it would just be orifice changes.
Make the next slides go.
Yeah, I think you're done.
Oh, is that it? Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I think that's it.
Yeah.